How's it going, guys? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Sweet. Awesome. All right. So the weekend just went by, and I saw that some of you guys are doing just like I was doing some work. Gonna start sharing here before I forget. Very cool to see some more results. It's like just so you know, so you're not alone in your pain. I had to redo 3 times the pores in my face. I actually redid yesterday the pores on the face of my model, and you saw the post I posted today, I guess, of my current renders, and those are basically like brand new pores that I just added by using that little array of pores that I sculpted instead of like doing one by one, right? Like remember I told you it's very cool to do one by one in those areas here in the mask, but then for a lot of the other stuff, you can get away by just using a little array. So I did a lot of the work around the face using an array of pores, including the forehead and stuff. And then for the cheeks, I tried to do with that, and it actually works pretty nicely. So I just filled up the gaps. But the thing is, the type of skin, like I explained before, it's like because as an older person, it seems like the skin gets like paper thin, and then the pores kind of go away. And then because of that, I'm actually starting to sculpt this stuff here, which is like, let me just go HD here so you can see. Let's do like a preview. So you're gonna see the pores are very, very pretty much like super visible still in this area here. It's good to have them, although I'm gonna be removing a lot of that information, just so we have like a little bit of an underlaying kind of, believable skin in there. But a lot of stuff is going to start turning more into this kind of result right here, like mostly, it's like wrinkles. And because I did this stuff over the weekend, I'm going to probably do some demo for you guys before we get into the eye stuff. And like the type of brushes I'm using to create like this type of effect around the eyelids in here, and then the sides in here, this wrinkles, which is basically like just like hand sculpting basically, but I'm gonna show you the stuff I'm using, like the brushes and everything. It's nothing that I do during this time when you guys are not watching me. It's brand new information. If something is brand new, I'm gonna just like, the day after, I'm gonna be showing you guys exactly what I did. So at least you guys are way aware of that. So, and let me see if I need anything else. I think just the mask here is fine. Let's hide the hair. Let's go HD around here. And today we're going to be looking at a lot of stuff around eyes and all that stuff. So just so you know, like that's what I'm talking about right here. See like those little circles in there? That's basically my array of pores that I'm actually applying. See, like I have all those little gaps in here, and in those gaps I'm going to be filling up with the individual pores. But it saves me a ton of time, because especially this type of face here, like I said, I'm going to be sculpting a lot of wrinkles and smoothing out most of this stuff anyway. So that's going to be just like almost like a background kind of thing. And because of doing some sculpting, I messed up some of those areas, but not a big deal because I just can put like some individual pores in there and just fill it up again. But you see like all these areas here actually filled, and also the forehead, because it's also that kind of like almost like papery kind of texture to it. Instead of like going full on super deep pores in the forehead, I went for a much less intensity here. So you're gonna see these little pores here. It's very, very, almost nothing in there. So I'm basically like doing a layer of those little guys first. I'm gonna have to blend around here because those are the strong ones against the soft ones. But then you see when I get around here, you barely can see them because they are all covered with this texture, right? And this texture here is basically that same one that I'm showing you guys for a while, which is this one here, right? With the spray, using the same kind of deal. I mean, like I'm gonna do symmetrically. So directionally, just creating direction by doing that, right? You can do even a little bit stronger. So like adding direction, so I'm bringing it towards the center, right? Like making those little lines. And then eventually doing the circular motion that I mentioned before as well. So basically like if I get around here, basically like this entire texture here, which it looks a little funny here, but if I show you the render, it works very well. So for example, like around here, right? I can do a little work. Let's increase to 14. And then just do this like in circles. And you're gonna see that those little pores are gonna start fading away underneath this whole structure. What's happening here is that, like I said before, if you're not using an elastic brush, if you're just using a regular standard brush, what the brush is going to do is kind of like it's going to destroy the form that's underneath, right? It's going to override everything. So even if you have pores like that, if you do enough texturing like that, you're going to see they're going to start disappearing. So that's kind of like the way I'm blending them out here. So that's why you're not seeing a lot of them in here. This was all covered with the same intensity of pores like this area here in the eyebrow. It's just that I was doing a lot of this texturing that's basically like in circular motion, like I said, right? Covering it. So you can see around here, it's all covered with this circular motion, right? And then if I need some direction, I can just add some like that. And then I get some direction right there, right? And same thing around here. I bring, like, for example, like following the wrinkles, I bring some direction. And then obviously like in those pimples, I'm gonna have to smooth it out. And then in certain areas, for example, like the nose, I use the same brush. So same deal, for example, get your circular motion going on here, right? So I'm gonna do it right there. And then you can fill it up. So all this stuff here, it doesn't look like much because I'm using intensity of like 13 or 12, right? I can do some around here, for example, and blend this area here around the nose. And just use to blend back some of those pores that are kind of deep into something else, right? Like it becomes some other type of skin. And then when I get around here in this transition, I can just use some directional ones as well. I can make it even bigger like that, just to help with that blend around there. Just do like that. And then the other side, I start sculpting the other eye bag because remember, like I did that side asymmetrically, so I had to do this one asymmetrically as well. And building out some of those forms, you know, it's like the way I built them up is using the clay build up. And then at this point, I don't have like an inflate yet. So basically, like I'm building up those forms using this alpha 37 or 36. I think it's 37. And then basically like to get that nice and tight form going against the next one, right? So like that kind of stuff. So like you build this one up and then you move to the next one, build it up, and you get this nice, result in there. And then at the end, you can actually go, for example, like one subdivision level less, or even two, and you can do a little very, very tiny inflate. So intensity of 1, for example. And I'm gonna just slightly inflate this area here, just enough, but without destroying what's underneath, because if you start getting intersections, that's gonna generate some funky displacement maps, right? So make sure that you make things tight and more organic by using a little inflate, but it has to be very, very tiny intensity, right? Just like 1. I'm gonna go back here, gonna do the same around here, just to make those lines a little bit sharper. It's almost like pinching, right? Just by using the inflate, just to get them a little bit more organic, like that. And then for the size of the face, the way I detailed this stuff around here was using not at the highest level. I went like, let's say my highest level is like 30-something thousand polys. I'm actually at 8,000 now, or 9,000. So it's one subdivision level less than the latest, the top one. And I'm going to go asymmetrical. And I'm going to start with a similar approach that I said before, like around the mouth, right? So I'm going to go, for example, my intensity here is around 8. I'm just going to follow some of those pores, but not necessarily a perfect following, because I mean, like I'm just going to get those lines to follow the structure of the stretch of the face, right? So I'm going to be doing this and try to follow some of those pores, but not like locked into anything. And I'm actually using a combination of pressure here. So I'm pressing when I get more towards this area here, and then I start without almost no pressure, and then I fade into more pressure, right? And then I fade out again. It's like more pressure, less pressure, more pressure, less pressure, basically, every time I sculpt, something like that. And then at the end, if you have like those lines all marked and into place, so let's get some, let's see, just a little bit higher, so at 10. Get some of those. Try to make them not so parallel to each other. So from time to time, you cut the direction, right, and add some Ys in there instead of like just like parallel stuff. And then from time to time, you can actually start the direction from the side like that, and then bring towards that to create this kind of like crisscross pattern. It's very important to actually, that's what the skin does, right? You're talking about before the path of least resistance. And basically like the skin is breaking in a very, it's almost like an unusual way, but it's not. It's just like, that's the way that our skin breaks, but we don't see any of this because it's so elastic when we were young, right? But then when you're older, the elasticity kind of goes away. And then all those wrinkles start basically like showing what's the direction of everything, right? How the muscles are pulling stuff and how this is all compressing almost like an accordion, right? And then you start seeing those marks formed like over the years, especially the late years. You see all the direction baked in there, right? So once I have those little guys baked in here, so sculpted, so basically I'm just marking with the regular brush, right? Just with the standard brush with the little alpha 39 in there, little tweaked alpha curve, just like we are doing like during all those classes. So once I have that, then I switch to my clay buildup again. And again, I use intensity, let's say like a little higher, maybe like 3, and a very, very small brush. And then I'm just gonna build up right in the middle of those guys. And as I build up with it, you're gonna see that the pore is gonna start fading away. Because I'm, like I said, I mean, like this type of brush, it kind of like destroys what's underneath, right? It builds up on top of everything. If you don't wanna get this type of effect, then obviously you're gonna have to build like an elastic brush, right? The elastic brush is gonna preserve all the form, it's gonna just lift them, but without destroying anything. But in my case here, I want them to be destroyed. I want the pores to be raised to create that effect that, you know, the skin gets thinner and thinner. I'm gonna do this a lot around this area here tonight, probably. So you're gonna see like, look around here. See the pores, how deep they are? So I'm gonna start like with this tiny little brush with the intensity of 3, right? Using the clay buildup. I'm gonna start like following the direction of those wrinkles right over them. And you're gonna start seeing that they are lifting very slightly. And then those deep pores, all of a sudden, they're gonna start blending together into those lines, which is basically what I want. I want those lines to be more visible than the pores themselves, right? So I'm following that. And then obviously, when I get to a certain point here, now towards the side here, right to the nasolabial, I'm gonna start building them going that direction. So kind of go a little bit sideways right here. And also doing the same thing, kind of like destroying the form a little bit. In the case of your models, a lot of you are sculpting like younger people, then you wanna make sure that your pores are nice and visible. But if you get into something like this, you know, it's like a model that you're gonna need like to build someone pretty old, that's the type of treatment that I would recommend. You know, it's like build the pores the same way, keep them in there. If you don't want to spend too much time because you're going to be destroying them anyway, you can use like your array of pores. So instead of like spending many, many hours, you're going to spend just 1 or 2 hours, right? Doing that. And then you can come up with this brush and just like do this kind of treatment. Same gonna go towards the eyes in here. I did a lot around this eye here yesterday. And I started to actually blend them. So let's blend some of that and build some of those curves, those forms around there. Kind of like trying to build up some of the volumes, right? Because things are not, unless you have a very flat area like this one, where you're gonna see the wrinkles as basically like scratches. They don't have a lot of depth, especially around here, you know. These wrinkles are pretty much like they read like scratches if you look at the real photograph. But then for thicker forms, obviously you're gonna get like those thicker volumes, right? And then you're gonna have to build them up. If you simply mark them as a cut, you're gonna read exactly like that. It's gonna look like cuts instead of like actual organic forms that are basically like touching each other and then compressing each other like an accordion, like I said, right? So all this stuff here, as you add more volume, it's almost like you can read intention, you know, especially like in the thicker ones, like this ones. So if he's squinting, I want to make sure I can see the intention, you know, I can see that it's an actual life form, which is actually creating some kind of emotion, right? It's actually producing something that looks alive. So like all this compression, including here, right? Like for this very, very subtle facial expression, you know, it's like this little indentation in here. It's all in the references, you know. But the thing about references is that we tend to just look at the big picture, right? And then we try to nail, of course, like the frame of the face, and then the distance between eyes and nose and mouth, and you know, it's like all those relationships are super important. But once you get those ones fairly in place, then it's time to actually looking further and further into the image. It's almost like it becomes like almost like a fractal, you know. Every time you look a little closer, you're gonna see tiny little details, and those tiny little details are basically what are gonna give you a model, the feeling of something organic. They have to make sense. So, for example, around here, this area, I'm gonna make a mask in here. I basically like I carved this area a little bit deeper. So it's very subtle. If I remove the mask, you're gonna see right there. So you see there is a mark right here. And then there is another one around here. There's another one that goes up. And there's another one, another folding here, and another one in here. All those things are basically like it's a system, right? So there is a bunch of cables being pulled underneath. And I have to imagine how those volumes are being created and how certain areas are gonna be deflated. If I have like the volume of the muzzle, it's because I have the teeth and the arch of the teeth underneath, right? That's what's creating that. So when I look from the bottom angle here, see this is messed up. I'm gonna have to fix this area. So I have the arch in there, you know, like same for the bottom part, right? I have to make sure that those things read like they are actually contacting the teeth and wrapping around it. And same goes around here, right? So if I have like this the muzzle ending here, and I have a compression happening towards the back in here, you're gonna start seeing some secondary volumes being formed. So every time you're sculpting something like this, I try to treat almost like I said before, like it's almost like you're sculpting the whole human body, right? You treat the same way. So instead of like paying attention to biceps and, you know, triceps and whatever, you're basically gonna be concentrating those tiny little areas in the face, and each one of them, it's going to become something that you have to put a similar amount of attention, you know. We are not dealing with the muscle anatomy here specifically. You're creating basically something that I call surface anatomy, right? Because it's like those microstructures and the layers of fat and everything that's, you know, it's like underneath the skin, and how those things are creating all those tiny little forms. And it's the kind of stuff we take for granted because, you know, it's like when you're sculpting, like I said, you pay attention to the bigger forms, but then if you want to create something that looks believable, you have to sculpt the intention in there. And the intention is created by, you know, it's like paying attention to the way things move in the face, right? So let me just open this one up. Let's see, let's bring this one. Let's try that. F, projects, and then let's go to rate and then images. So those are some of the ones I posted today. Let's get the profile, maybe let's see this one, and then the side of the face. I think this one is a good one to show. Yeah, something like that. Let's open just those ones. So all those wrinkles I'm sculpting on the side of the face, right? Depending on the lighting, obviously, that you're using, they start reading very naturally around this angle here, right? You can see them very naturally. Around here, I have to make this wrinkle a little bit tighter because right now it looks a little artificial, you know? But it comes with that thing that I mentioned before, you know? It's like if you use some inflate brush to just like compress those things, but being careful, you can actually resolve that. And you see like how the pores are super visible right now, but they're gonna tend to disappear and become more like that type of structure. Same around this angle here, right? If you look at the way it looks in my render, the pore sizes, because I redid this entire face area yesterday, by using, like I said, like some of my arrays. They're still very visible in there, but that's basically the effect I'm going for. Something that's more blend into something else, you know. And the skin in here, you know, it's like it becomes more of like that little texture that's kind of like almost like cracked skin instead of like pores that you're gonna read everywhere. Even though in this area here around the eye bags and the top eyelid, you're not gonna see many pores anyway. Normally the pores are gonna start sculpting around here, right? On top of the nose, right here at the bridge, and then over the eyebrows. But here you're never gonna see like the pores themselves. You're gonna get some kind of different texture in there. And then the last one, I think it's this, let me just show you this, the top one from the top of the forehead. Actually, let's bring this onto Photoshop as well. So this is the one I actually told you, okay, good. That I'm actually not even using the pores, right? I actually sculpted the pores in there, very, very faint. But most of the stuff here is just that little cracked texture that's basically using that little random brush that I was just showing and adding direction towards going, you know, towards the top of the head, and then going across and following the direction of the wrinkles as well. So it's basically like it's a crisscross, and then crisscross, and then you get this little kind of cracked and, you know, it's like little squares in the middle. And then when I get to this area here, I'm gonna try to bring together and follow the direction of those wrinkles towards the forehead wrinkles, using that directional brush that I was just showing. Do this everywhere in there, right? And same around here. So I'm gonna be following this structure here with those little directional brushes, right? And you see this tiny little lines in here at the top of the bridge of the nose. So this kind of stuff, you know, really adds to the realism, because you start seeing like a life form, like I said, that has like everything seems to work in a way. So for example, like I'm gonna have like different types of skin for specialized areas, right? And obviously this is a very temporary map that I just borrowed from Stan Winston. But when you start adding the skin texture for this guy here, and this is gonna happen tomorrow, we're gonna be painting maps. I'm gonna be explaining as I paint the maps why I'm adding those areas a little bit lighter, why I'm thinking about the fat tissue underneath the skin, why I'm thinking about the blood vessels in certain areas, why I'm thinking about like the, you know, liver spots in certain areas because of like it's an old guy, right? There's a lot of thought that goes towards those things to make things believable, you know? Why I'm gonna paint like the tip of the nose slightly whitish in here just to give the impression that there's a cartilage underneath, right? All those things, thinking like, you know, what happens in real life, why I have those forms in there, right? And then and why those colors are changing that way. So we're going to be exploring this tomorrow. So just finishing it up here, basically like what I did, you see, like it's nothing super complicated. It's just basically like a matter of like observing the reference you have and the type of skin you're going for. But this is nothing more than simply using like the standard brush with the Alpha 39, and then using the clay build up very, very small, and then painting over it. For the eyes in here, I did the same thing. So for example, this entire area here, I started with this little clay build up with the Alpha 37, right? And intensity of 3. And then every time you want to build a bridge, for example, if you have an area like this one, the best thing to do is to use an Alpha the clay build up, so you can build this kind of structure. Obviously I did very strong so you can see in there, but if I go softer, right, I can go around here, for example, and then let's build like this little thin skin right here. So I'm gonna start with this Alpha and just build one of them right there, right? Another one right there. Start like building those forms just to look like paper thin skin, and then change direction here eventually, create a little Y in here. And then I can use my little trusty modified standard brush with the little Alpha 39. And I can do this, look. I can just get standard, and I can just carve it a little bit deeper. So let's say 8 for intensity. So I'm gonna carve a little bit deeper in here. Actually, I'm using sub. Okay, let me just carve it here. Actually, let's do more intense than that. Oh, I don't have an add, sorry. So let's try that. Just carve in there. But then once I have some of those carved, I can just reverse the intensity. So basically like I'm carving down, right? I'm just carving it. So I'm gonna build some areas with the same brush. I'm gonna just grow it very slightly like that. And I'm gonna come over it and you're gonna see there's a sharp line that's being built on top of it. Can you see right there? Like just a sharp line. So it helps to create this impression that's kind of like a paper thin kind of surface. That kind of effect, you know. Basically like it's the same alpha, it's just reversed. So you're gonna notice that basically like all the stuff I do, I don't use many brushes, you know. It's very old school way. I just use them like in combination, for example, like bigger size, bigger intensity, smaller intensity. Let me carve this area here to the same effect. Look, there's a little bit of a sharp edge in there because it's like a paper thin kind of thing. You have to imagine like the thickness of the skin, right? If it's an area that has a ton of thickness and fat deposits underneath, obviously you're going to have to come and create those folds much stronger, right? Like they are fatter and they have like this big forms in there. But then when you look at something like this, which is basically just skin, right? If it's just skin, then you have to actually be very careful and build the skin to look like something thin. And to do that, you're not going to use like a big form, right? You're going to come with those tiny forms, and some of them you're going to make them slightly sharper, right? So you see, like I was sculpting all this stuff here while at my subdivision level, like one subdivision level than the highest that I have, right? So sometimes it's cool to do that because you get like those forms without them being so sharp. So it gets slightly smoother than what you would normally get if you're sculpting at the highest level, right? And at the same time, it's much faster for you to sculpt. Like it's much more interactive to sculpt in something that's slightly less dense, right? So I'm just gonna create some lines here. But I gotta stop this before I go too crazy because that's basically what takes me like hours, right? Just like, you cannot stop once you start doing this kind of stuff. Like those wrinkles in here yesterday was like, oh man, that's awesome. Let's go to town with it. But I mean, like I said, I cannot spend like all the time we have, like just doing stuff in real time because most of everything is gonna be a repetition of everything I'm explaining. So if I tell you I'm using this brush for this kind of purpose, just imagine that that's basically what I'm doing for all those areas that you see similar kind of detail, right? Same for the pores. I explained like the intensity of them already. You know, it's like same for the wrinkles, the way I'm carving them. And then this is gonna be like a lot of hours in refinement, right? Like to make sure that they look nice and clean. For example, like right here, right? I'm gonna clean them up. If something looks like it's too broken up, I might blend some of them together, some of those forms together by using the clay buildup and just going over some of those wrinkles and then blending them together. But in terms of techniques, it's basically exactly what I'm doing everything else. And although you're not seeing the type of gesture that I have, I try to describe, you know, it's like every time I create something with a certain type of gesture, like either I'm doing circular motion here, you know, or I'm adding more pressure in here and then less in here. I want you guys to try to imagine what I'm doing because I'm trying to be precise in my description of what I'm doing so you can actually feel it. But anyway, so that's just a little quick demo for that because we have the other stuff to deal with, which is going to be the eye, which is very, very important. It's what actually can make or break your character most of the time. And I have like the eyes of my characters, they normally look very alive. And it's a combination of things that I do, you know. It's a combination of having the right shaders combined. And also, let me just save this. Let's pay attention to what I'm doing because I keep talking and I don't pay attention and sometimes just get lost, which is a lot of times. So for the eyes, let's start with some theory here. And the theory is basically like, you know, it's like when it comes to shaders, things to observe are like the refraction indexes, right? And we are building a very simple model of the eye, which is like you already saw in most of the stuff I do. I try to achieve like the most realistic results using the simplest possible approaches, you know. It's like to make something very simple for an artist who is not very technical or anything like that. But of course, there's a lot of technicalities behind all those things, right? But in terms of the eye, for example, we're not building every single element in here. We are building just like it's going to be the eyeball with the cornea basically built in, right? So it's going to have like the sclera and the cornea all in a single object with the transparency map right in the middle, which is going to be just like a ramp. And then we're going to have our iris itself. And the lens, we're not going to build this lens here because this is basically the hole, right? We don't want anything perfectly accurate because you're not going to see anything below this part here, beyond this part here. It's going to be completely darkness in there. So we're kind of going to ignore. But to observe is basically like the index of refraction. You have like 1.38 for the index of refraction of the cornea, this layer, and then this inside area here with the water inside, that's going to be 1.34. So we're not going to be dealing with two different types of refraction here. We're going to just average the two of them. We're going to use like 1.36 as the average and be done with it, right? Unless you want to go like very scientific about your approach and try to improve things, which you're completely free to do it. But the way I do it, I just like simplify things. So it's like a 136 I'm going to use for that. The other thing to observe that's very important, it's to look at the size of an eyeball, right? So for example, like if you have the size of eyeball, the diameter of it, is if you Google human eyeball diameter, right? You're gonna get like 24 millimeters, so 2.4 centimeters, which is gonna be the average for it. It's gonna go like between 24.2 to 23.7, right? So actually this is like it's not a perfect sphere, so that's what they are saying here. But basically like it's 24 millimeters if you want to simplify things like I normally do. So 24. And then if you Google something else, which is like the human iris diameter is 12 millimeters, right? So the relationship is very easy. Basically the iris is half of that distance, right? So the iris is going to sit right in the middle of like going to be 12 millimeters in the middle of 24 millimeters, right? So proportion is pretty straightforward. So if we jump here into our Maya scene, that's basically what I'm going to be doing. I have like this distance measure in there that's 2.4 centimeters against 1.2 centimeters, which is basically the size of the iris, as you can tell right there, right? So we're going to be dealing with this type of measure. If you don't have it built this way, it's a good time to adjust it. But let's explore how my geometry looks like in ZBrush first. I want to show you everything like from the way it's built, like all the elements that are part of it, and then break down all the shaders and everything so you can have access to everything. So let's just open this. Let's go back to I. And then go to my scene. No, actually it's under ZBrush. And then this one was saved in the last class, so that should be good. Let's open that one. So it has about like 13 million polygons because I'm using some HD in there, but it's not completely necessary to tell you the truth for what I have in here. But I have this ZBrush file that has all the elements of my eye, basically. And that includes the caruncula here. We should see like this is the old version I have. Like it's still the same texture I use to this day, but you see how crappy it is? There's a lot of room for improvement in this. I could make like much nicer veins and everything. But you're gonna see why this doesn't matter that much with my current setup. And then I have the cornea itself, which looks like that. So I'm gonna subdivide a couple of times. And basically this one has no HD. It's about 4.5 million polygons only. Right? If I switch to a different material so you can see it, that's the way it's painted. So for the coloring of it, I normally start with a plain color and without the, it's like any special brush or anything. I just like using like no alpha and then switch to RGB and then just paint like start with the plain color like this one, like this pink in here. And then add some like very, very broad like noise, right? And then for the veins themselves, you're gonna notice that a lot of them are hand painted. So this kind of stuff here, we're gonna be talking about how I'm painting all this stuff during the class tomorrow that we're gonna be talking about painting albedo stuff. But just so you have like a reference, like a visual reference, a lot of those are painted by hand. And then a lot of times what you can do if you have a model like this you can go to your symmetry, right? And you can create like a radial symmetry. So you probably dealt with that before. So basically like you have symmetry and then in Z, right? And then you're gonna just click this radial symmetry here. And then you can have like a radial count that can be higher than that. But this one is basically like if I wanna save some time sculpting some wrinkle, veins in there, for example. So let's just get this one. And then, for example, let's see if I can start one here. So if I have a vein like that, right, you see like it's kind of repeating. Let me just get a little bit more saturated than that. A little bit dark too. It's like very intense as well. I'm gonna keep the intensity a little bit lower. So, you know, it's like if I'm sculpting something like that, you see like it's actually, I'm changing direction, right? And I'm gonna, you know, change my pressure as well and try to incorporate some of that stuff. So basically like you can hand paint those guys in multiple places. And if you do it like in a clever way, you can actually just disguise them. And you, at the end of the day, you're not gonna notice that it's a repetition at all. But this can save you some time, you know, it's like just detailing stuff like that. And you see like the cool thing about that little alpha modify that we have, that's basically like alpha with a little curvature, right? And this alpha 39 being plugged, is that it has a little bit of a fade in and fade out, right? So it's not like a sharp line. It has a tiny little bit of a glow around it. See like it's a little glowy in there. So that kind of stuff is very cool to create like micro veins and all. So that's basically like a lot of that I did by hand like that. If you look at references, never a good idea to add just like pinkish colors. That's why when you get closer to the iris in here, sometimes it's interesting to add those broad areas of, let me just turn off the symmetry, broad areas of yellows. So basically like every time I paint something, I'm gonna be talking about that tomorrow, it's in very like, very thin layers, right? So if I'm adding a color map, unless I'm doing something like veins like that I'm using intensity of 23, if it's just broad colors like the yellows, I'm gonna use like 2 or 3 in here and then get those colors painted. For example, I'm gonna pick a yellow in here, a little bit more towards orange, and then I'm gonna get like all the way up here and try to use a color that's a very desaturated kind of yellow, maybe a little bit more saturated than that, around there. And then if you start painting, you're gonna see this type of yellow if I'm using the mouse, right? But if you're using the tablet, you can actually very carefully add those types of yellows around there, see? Very, very carefully, and then very, very low intensity. You can add those yellows. And then obviously like the vein is gonna produce the whole result at the top, right? But just so you see, like it's very, very small intensity. The color, it looks like that. So for example, if I click in here, you can see it's at 233, 199, and 156. That's the type of yellow I use around those areas, similar to that, you know. And then there's a trick that I actually told you guys before, which is, okay, so what in nature has a very interesting form like that looks like micro veins, right? And I found out that lightning is very, very cool, right? You can get like lightning and make them into an alpha. So I made this alpha here. Actually, let's go back to ZBrush. So let's use this little plane that I have here, which is like, this is my little array of pores in there, right, that I created. So that's the one I use most of the time. And then I can get this brush here that says, let's see if I can find it, because I'm saving all this stuff and I simply don't remember where they are. So let's see, skin pores, colors. It's adding up like way too much stuff at this point. Skin vein, let's see, not this one. Let's see, skin stretch. Oh man, I hope I can find it. Otherwise I can just like make it again so you guys can see it. Let's just look for a little bit more. Carve, stubble, skin liver, skin color, skin pimples, neck, huh? Oh, entroveins, this one, so cool. So this one here is basically like, if you look at the alpha itself, let me just remove the, yeah, there's no curvature in there. So you're gonna look like this. Basically this is actually the picture of lightning that I downloaded from the internet. And then I just, like in Photoshop, I turned like into black and white, right? Like, so I eliminate all the colors and then turn it into this alpha, right? So I have this little alpha in there, looks like this from the picture. And then obviously in ZBrush, you can paint and sculpt at the same time, right? So that's a great thing to do because you can simply like switch to, let's go back to my model so you can actually see it in action. So if I use something like this, let's say, let's turn on my symmetry again with the radial. And then let's get a little bit darker like that. Let's try it around here, for example. And intensity is at 30 right now. Let's just reduce it to, let's say 16. So look at this thing here. So this is still a little strong. So let's get less intense. Let's see, maybe 8. Get a little bit more color. And let's try it again around there. So get this type of effect, you know. So a lot of those bigger ones I did here is basically using that type of brush. And I was like just adding those things just with those lightning, basically, right? So around here, you know, it's like just things like that. Obviously, I would try to avoid to make like too much of use too much array around this, because this area here is much less important, right? All the areas you see with most of the reds, imagine that the eyelid's going to be covering almost everything, and this is going to be just the inner and outer part of the eye. And just when you rotate the eye, right, you're going to be able to see some of that detail. But especially like, you know, unless you're looking up a lot, you're going to see most of that. But so I would basically, like, I wouldn't not be too concerned about adding detail in the bottom part in here. But try not to use too much like symmetry with array like that, you know. So that type of stuff, like I would try to avoid using too much of it. So basically the construction of the eye, in terms of topology and everything, it looks like this. Super simple, as you can tell, right? That's basically the eyeball. I have the cornea kind of like bulged out in there. In our case here, we're just sculpting something for a still, but if it's for a movie, right, someone's gonna have to rig and basically like use like a wrap deformer or something like that to make sure that the eyelids always conform to everything, right, including the bulge of the cornea here, right? But in terms of topology itself, it's super simple, right? I could go like a lower resolution, but this is my lowest. I try to keep like the lowest resolution a little bit higher than expected because I want to make sure I can read all those curvatures. And if you go too low with your resolution, once you start subdividing the mesh, it changes the form, becomes more oval sometimes, you know. But if you have enough support, then it's always like preserves the roundness of it, right? So basically, like if you want to use like as a visual reference, that's basically what I did. And you see like right here, I don't care about the back of it because I'm not using it anyway, but I would try to avoid like a plague to have something like that. For example, a star right in the middle if it's in the front, for example, right? So if you start subdividing, you got the star in here, try to eliminate it. And then build something like this, a topology is much more square that actually can have a nice support in there, because we want to make sure that this reads like a mirror, right? You cannot have any imperfection in the surface in here, and something in the middle would really create a pinch, and then your reflections gets completely screwed up, right? And then another thing that I do, for example, if I bring this eyeball to Maya, I can actually create like a duplicate of my sphere, this external sphere in here, and then just compress into a little disk and make sure that the disk fits right here. Because at any time, if I'm modifying something, I want to have a backup for that, for this bulge to be always perfect. So if you want to make sure that areas like this one here, right? Let me turn off because you're not seeing anything. But if you're this area here, right? Those little points in here, you see, they have the potential to have some kind of pinching happening there. So to prevent that, if you have a buffer object, which is like this oval shape as a backup, at any time in Maya or in ZBrush, you can just snap things back and recover that perfect form, which is very important. Once you're building this, make sure that this is snapped to a perfect form at all times. And then after that, once it's built, then it's fine. You don't need to worry about it anymore. But just make sure this is like, it's a perfect surface, right? So moving to the iris itself, which is the most important part here. Actually, everything is important, but the iris is very important. So for the construction of the iris, basically like this is the model I have, the current model. And I have like 852 polygons in here. So it doesn't look like it goes higher than this, but it actually has HD geometry, right? So if I render it with HD geometry, it's not gonna add a ton of it. It just has a little bit more of this little lines in here. But in terms of the form itself, it's not gonna change much, right? So the way I built this, let me switch to this thing. Let's see. So I posted this on my Instagram some time ago, which was like a sped up version of it, which is very short. But what I'm gonna do for you guys, because I don't want to spend the time actually doing this in real time, because it takes some time, right? I'm gonna post this video, which is the extended version, which takes about 10 minutes. And you can see everything that I did about it. So you see like this inner part in here, those guys I actually created by using the radial that I just showed you, radial symmetry, right? Just to establish some of those little forms. And everything I'm sculpting here is using the radial symmetry for now. So you're gonna start now, still symmetry, right? And now it's not symmetry anymore. So that's basically like just observing a picture that I found and then try to reproduce the form. So you're gonna see this is gonna go on for like 10 minutes. I'm gonna post this video for you guys. You can watch the entire thing. So it's kind of slow and you can see exactly what I'm doing instead of like a sped up version that takes only 1 minute. It's like super fast. You cannot see anything. So I'm gonna be posting this one and you can see the entire process, right? It's like all the way to the end, which just turns out to be like that, right? So you're gonna be able to see this entire thing. And then, so in terms of reference, different types of eyes, right? I don't know if this is a rule, but something that I observed and I was curious about it is that different colors of eyes have like different structures. In average, it's kind of like it happens most of the time like that. So if I have like a brown eye like that, these structures are kind of rough, right? You're gonna see like it has those forms like those micropores and everything, but in terms of those little structures, you see like they are kind of broad, right? You have a lot of cool stuff in there going on, but it's not like super thin little lines that you're gonna see everywhere, right? Now compare that to like a light eye, something like that. This one is kind of like a low resolution. Let's find something else, like this one. See how many more little lines you can see? They're tiny little ones and super thin. And I noticed that like for the most part, like between like light eyes and then darker eyes, that they have like apparently much more of that kind of microstructure, you know? See those little tiny lines? They're like all over the place, right? And then you look at something like this, more rough, and then this one is still kind of rough, right? It's kind of like almost like a sponge kind of surface. And then again, like a lighter eye, like much more detail in there. And then again, the brown eye, much less detail and much more like a sponge kind of surface, right? Same with this one, it's kind of halfway, right? It has some microstructures, but it's also kind of brownish. So it's like a little bit more rough. Same with this one, right? Very porous. And then again, this one here, you start seeing those tiny little micro lines, right? So I don't know, like if that's something that always happens, but at least with the reference I look, I would say like it's pretty much like almost every time, you know, almost every time I see like this type of microstructure in the lighter eyes. But for my eyes, for example, since I'm using the same model over and over again, this one is a green eye, kind of like has the same kind of microstructure in there, right? But then we get the brown eyes, that kind of spongy, less structured kind of thing. So for my eyes, I'm just playing with the color. I'm not being precious to the point like I'm gonna create like a different super specific type of iris for each one of those characters. I might actually sculpt a couple of variations just to have the variations. And but it's just something for you guys to observe, you know. It's like if you look for references, there's that link that I posted from Palamida that has a ton of stuff. It has a lot of information there, like lots of different pictures of different types of eyes. So you guys go at it because they're super high resolution, you know. Look at that thing. Like super thin, tiny little structures, right? It's almost like a jellyfish. So just like an observation, of course. So let's go back to the ZBrush. So that's basically the way I sculpted the iris. You see it's just a disc, right? It's not that I have something hidden in here. It's just a disc. And why do I sculpt just a disc? Well, because it would be a waste of polygons if I had the entire thing, because I'm just blending this area around here. between the sclera, right, and the cornea. I'm gonna blend this area to make this entire area transparent. So I don't need to have the entire eyeball. And I try to save polygons because I wanna make sure that I go high resolution in this area here. Because what I do, instead of like this exporting from the lowest resolution, which is basically just this, right? There's not a lot of support in there. So if I exported this mesh the way it is here to ZBrush, to Maya, I would have to have like a vector displacement in order to recreate all those intricate like ins and outs of the surface. And I don't want to deal with that because, you know, it's like vector displacement can be a pain sometimes. You know, to find the right, you have to do all those tests to find the right setting for the different softwares you use. ZBrush even have this little test bench kind of scene that you can use. But I didn't want to deal with that. So instead of that, I'm exporting actually at 53,000 polys like that. So at least I have some support. So you can see those little caves in there. And then that way I can actually, you know, it's like have some support. And then let's see how many subdivision levels I need. Like this is 1, so 2, 3, 4, right? So when I export my displacement map, first I'm gonna export this one as being my main mesh. So I'm gonna export this one at as my mid-resolution mesh. And then I'm gonna go to the lowest resolution. I'm gonna export it again, same way we did for the face. This is nothing new for you guys. I'm gonna export this one as the base mesh. And then for my morph target, I'm gonna do that thing, you know, it's like delete basically everything, store, switch, import the same base mesh, just to make sure that's locked. But then the trick is when I export the displacement map, I'm gonna go to subdivision level 4 because I wanna match the mid resolution I just exported, right? And then create the subdivision levels from that point on and all the way to the top, and always using the switch morph target. So that's gonna be the only difference. For the face, we're doing the same stuff, right? Instead of exporting the lowest resolution, we're exporting one subdivision level more, just to have more support for the XGen. But then for this one here, because I'm exporting higher resolution, I'm gonna export matching that level, which is 4 in the case of the iris, right? So I'm gonna be exporting at this level here. So in our case, like 53,000 polys, right? For the color that I painted here is really very, very crappy. It's if I turn off this one here, that's all it is. It could as well be completely plain. I don't think it would do much, but I add a little bit of variation in there by using some cavities and stuff like that, you know. If you don't know how to select by cavity, it's basically like you go to your selection, to your masking here, and you can just say mask by cavity. So let's go here, right? And we can say like this one. So basically, like at this point, if you paint anything, let's get like a very vibrant color here, green. And then turn this one. So now you have, oh, I have a interesting, oh, look at that. That's pretty cool that I have actually the, I might be able to create those little lines, huh? Let's try that, let's see. Since I'm here, transform, let's do a symmetry here. And then let's do that, look at that. Woo, too high. Let's try it last. Look at that. Cool. Too symmetrical, but you got the point. So let's go back to this one here. And then let's, where's my, let's see, my cavity is working. Mask my cavity. It's supposed to. Maybe I'm going to need to go one subdivision less, higher. So let's try that, hide it. And let's try again. Yeah, you got some of that detail in there, especially in the middle, right? Something like that. So, you know, it's like just to get some color in there, but like I said, it's nothing very special. If you look at the color itself, it's quite crappy. You're just getting some of that stuff, and then it almost looks like a little glowy around those areas. So, and then the important part about this is that your UV reads completely flat, right? So this whole thing here has to sit in a very flat UV. So when you flatten this one in Maya, for example, just make sure that everything is like in a square and it takes like most of the area of the UV. I'm gonna show you guys what I have in there, and for the eyeball as well. Both of them have to be sitting completely flat and right in the middle of the UV space, because you're gonna be using ramps to control all the coloring that we're gonna be doing with them. So we're gonna be using that. So I'm gonna jump right to Maya. I think it's clear, like at least like visually, what I did, right, in terms of the topology. So for this guy here and for this guy, which is like I said, It's very low resolution. My lowest resolution here is super low, but I just did that because I can control, for example, like the primary forms here if I need to. So it's good to have like a lower resolution mesh. But in fact, I'm using 53,000 polys to export to Maya, right? You see, like there's a little bit of this forms here that I observe some of those pictures as well. That kind of like it's a little bit of a waviness right around here. And the way that it protrudes, it goes up, right? Kind of like a little volcano, and then goes down again. So basically like it goes up that little hump in there and then goes down to this valley again, right? So never build like completely flat, always add some little bit of volume here. This is important because you're gonna get little shadows when you turn around, right? And the way that the caustic effect's gonna be playing, they're gonna be actually using some of the surface, the irregular surface, to actually create like you know, we're gonna be doing using some specular in there just to fake some caustics in certain areas, but we're gonna be using caustics as well. So that's basically like the way that's built, right? So like a little volcano in there. See, like the pupil itself is just a hole that I just like extruded, so it looks like this. So nothing super fancy in terms of the structure of the surface, right? It's just like very simple geometry like that. Just making sure that he reads like this, right? Goes up, and then there's a little edge, right? That's a little raised, and then goes down again, and then down again for good. So don't worry about the sculpting thing because I got you covered with that video, which is gonna be going for about 10 minutes, and you can see everything I did in there. In terms of the brushes I used, it's basically like clay build up all the way through. You're gonna see the way I'm building things up in there. And then probably for the noise, I added some, you know, the standard to add some of that. You can even use like the noise maker here in ZBrush to create some of that if you want to add the noise in here, or you can just add in Maya, you know. But for all those forms in here, everything is sculpted with the clay buildup and using a little alpha like the 37, like I said, right? Just to make sure that you have more of an organic feel to it. But it's only like simply like observation, you know, thing. Just like pick one of the references you like the best. Some of them are simpler than this, and you still can get a very realistic result if you have the forms in place, right? So for the carancula here, you're gonna see that the way that's built, it's very simple, right? Like it doesn't have anything fancy about it. It looks like this. It's a flat surface that looks like this. It has a double side because I wanna make sure that the subsurface scattering is working correctly. And it basically like it almost touches the iris, right? It goes all the way up here. Actually, my model in Maya, I think I have it been closer to the iris because this is a tricky one. A lot of people get in trouble trying to blend this correctly. And I'm gonna show you exactly how I'm blending. I'm using a combination of transmission and also making the geometry transparent. And in that case, it basically eliminates the specular and everything. So it becomes completely transparent, right? So I'm gonna show you those objects in Maya now. Let's go jump right here into Maya. And then I have the scene in here, right? Which is the one I was just showing you guys. So that one has the measurement. It's like 2.4 centimeters against 1.2 for the iris, right? And then if I look at the model itself, it looks like this. This one was exported not at the very lowest resolution, probably like one subdivision level more than that. See, like it's really touching the iris right here, right? It's pretty close. And you see it's not even conformed yet. It's just like not even perfectly conformed yet. But you're gonna see that this still blends very perfectly when I render. And the reason why is because of the shaders I'm gonna be showing you guys. So so I got one of those maps from the CG Haven, right? HDRI Haven. And which is this one here. If you want to try, is this one called Glass Passage, and it's a very cool one because it has this diffuse kind of light, right? It's pretty cool looking. I like this map a lot. And so for the eye, like I said before, let's explore the geometry. That's all it is, right? Nothing fancy. That's the lowest resolution. I'm exporting the maps the way we export, basically like from the subdivision level 1 and up. So basically like just crank that slider to 1 first. Let's hide it. And then that's the iris, right? If I click the iris, let's see faces 53,000, which is basically that subdivision level I show you guys. So that means I have those ins and outs in there. And then once you have the displacement assigned, then at least the displacement is going to be able to find where the holes are, right? Because now we have enough support. That's why I'm exporting with this resolution. Even if you render something like this without any displacement, just to smooth it out, it still works fairly well, you know? But it's nicer if you have like the super detailed stuff, obviously. Well, let's do a little render here first. So we're gonna just press this, and let's do this little render to see how it looks like in here. With and then I'm gonna be opening the shader networks to show you guys exactly what's doing there. But I'm more interested in this area around here, like this this blend between the caruncula and the sclera, right? That has to look perfect. And like I said, it's hard sometimes for people to blend it correctly, so it always looks a little artificial. So let's just render this area here for now. And while it renders, you guys can ask questions, and then I'm gonna keep working on it so we can actually get all the shader networks like broke down so you guys can play with them. But feel free to ask questions. We're just doing some renders now.
Hey man.
Hey.
How's it going?
Good, good.
I don't have question for now, but about what you said about that pinching effect for some 5 edged vertices in ZBrush.
Yeah.
I don't know if you are aware of that, but there is another kind of a smooth in ZBrush. It's hard to explain, but the way you zoom in or zoom back with Alt in ZBrush, if you use it with Shift key, you have another algorithm for a smooth.
Okay.
That algorithm would how to say, would not do that pinching effect in the mesh. For this iris or in this eyeball, it's not that much necessary to use that, but sometimes you have lots of those kind of things and you cannot project and reproject again, and you are it's kind of headache to have those effects. That's a smoothing would help.
Oh, okay. Yeah, there's a bunch of different smooths there for like for like peaks and valleys and stuff. Like there's I think they have like maybe like 10 or 12 different smooths, right?
No. What I'm talking about is not another brush. It's
you're talking about
a regular smooth brush, but when you use it, like you use Alt for zoom.
Oh, yeah. That one is actually sharpens things. Actually, the smooth reverse with Alt is sharpen.
No. I'm saying how you zoom in or zoom back in ZBrush. You used to press Alt and right key or left key, and you
let it go.
Let the Alt go.
Okay.
But when you use that hotkeys, but with Shift on top of your mesh, I mean, hold on Shift and left click and let the Shift go, but you need to hold the left key. It's another algorithm for a smooth.
That's very interesting. I have to try that.
Yeah, it's always, that's hard to explain, that kind of zoom in and zoom back in ZBrush.
Yeah, what's the difference that he has on top of this one? It creates more of a...
It's...
Sorry?
It smoothes that pinching effect.
Oh, okay.
It's the relax smooth.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, it's just it relax the air without changing the topology, something like that.
Oh, very cool.
smoothes the forms a bit, but for that pinching effect, it works so good.
Oh, that's very cool. Yeah, I'm gonna experiment with that because I have to, you know, it's like you have to train your brain, right? It's kind of like a muscle memory.
Yeah.
A lot of times, I mean, like people ask me stuff at work, you know, it's like, oh, how you do this one? And I try to tell them, well, you press this key and then I cannot explain. So I was like, let me drive for a second. And then I just like automatically just press the buttons.
Yeah, just remember it's kind of like zoom in or zoom back in ZBrush, but with shift.
Okay, cool. Awesome. So you see like this this surface here, you see like how detached from the surface it is, but how it blends so perfectly here. So this type of effect in here to look like two objects are merging into a single one. That's why actually one thing that I did as a trick in here, right, was to actually use this painted color with some veins in there instead of like just plain. And then that in transparency combined with this is going to create this effect of like dual layer of veins, right? So when I render in here, you see I'm desaturated and everything. There's a couple of tweaks in the mapping here in Maya, but they basically like blend together into a single surface. So let's see how this is going to be, how this is being done like underneath, right? So let's explore. Let's start with the caruncular here. Let's put this one aside, so we don't want to see it right now. So for the caruncular itself, let's explore this map. First, let's look at the UVs that we have, which are very, very simple. So under UV editor, the trick in here, you see I'm UVing them. So basically like this is the front and this is the back of it. And so it's a split and it's vertical, right? Because I want to make sure I can control this with the ramp. Obviously, could control with the vertical, with a horizontal ramp as well if you want it. So if you want to make this entire thing horizontal, you can do it as well. I made it vertical so I can actually control with the vertical ramp. So it's optional to you guys. And then basically I'm going to start blending from this point here and down. And then with the ramp, I'm going to basically like control how much I want of that blend, right? As you can tell here, that's basically like the curve. It's actually repeating there, but that's basically the blend is happening around here. It's obviously much softer than that when you render. So I'm going to show you the maps I have plugged. So that's the UV. And then for the shader, as you can tell, let's see if I go back to, let's start with subsurface. So subsurface is cranked all the way to 1, right? That means that you can completely ignore my settings for the base in here because it's not using at all, right? That's basically like the subsurface, like I explained before. This controls the blend between subsurface and then just like complete diffuse, right? So this one is 1, but it doesn't affect anything because this one is overriding with 1. So basically it's completely subsurfacey. So I'm gonna turn off the base because ignore it. For the specular, I'm using like a specular of 1, and then the color is not all the way to complete white. So it's a little bit off white, right? Instead of 1 is 0.916. And then for the roughness, it's very, very shiny. So it's 0.10, 0.010. You can copy those values. And then for the index of refraction, I'm using the same as the cornea, which is 1.36 for that reason I said before, average between 134 and 138. When I come to transmission, this is basically a transparency map, right? So the transparency map in Arnold you control right here. So the color is white. Nothing else is changing here. So it's all 0, 0, scatter is black. But then the weight, that's the map we plugged in here. And this map here, let's see which one is the ramp. It's just a regular ramp plugged from Maya, right? I had trouble, for example, like in a geometry, like the eyeball. For some reason, when I opened my scene, what I updated from Maya 2018 to 2019, the ramp wasn't working anymore, like the Maya ramp. So I actually had to plug like an Arnold ramp. But for some reason, for this object here is working fine. So I'm just gonna keep the way it is. But just so you know, you can use like either the ramp from Maya itself or from Arnold. So let's open the shader networking here so you can understand what I'm saying. And then I'm gonna just graph that. This is the shader network for the caruncula. Let's explore that a little bit. Let's see, graph input and output. It's a little small, kind of like that. Okay, so that you don't worry about this one because this is the main shader, but actually the main node assigned to the model, but this one is the shader you want to look at. So let's look at this again. So basically, like for the transmission, I have plugged this ramp in here that looks like this. If you can see like it's a vertical ramp. If you have the model horizontal, obviously you'd use like a different direction, right? But this one is a vertical one. And then it looks like this. So in the case of my model, depends on the position of your curricula, right? In the space of the UV. In my case, I had to use like black around here and then white around here. So basically like most of it is solid, and then it gets transparent just at the very edge, right? If you're getting the opposite result, for example, like your black is not becoming, sometimes you have to go to your effects here and invert it. So for example, like the white becomes the transparent part and the black becomes the solid part. It all depends on how you have it set, right? Most of it, without it, most of it is transparent. And then with it, most of it is solid, and then transparent is just that little area. So so here, let's say this is just a ramp to control, like I said. And then for the maps themselves, let's look in here. So transmission is basically, that's what it is, just a ramp. And then the subsurface, I have this color here, which is not quite that color that we have plugged for the skin. I'm actually using a slightly different color, which is like 0.442, 0.202, and 0.147 for the RGB, right? Based on 0 to 1, right? And then for the scale, I'm using 0.115, no anisotropy, and then basically like the random walk 2 is the shader that I'm picking. And then for the coat, I'm using a little bit more of like an extra spec. So on top of the 1 that I have for the specular, right? 1 and then a little bit off-white in 0.010. This one is even sharper. So I'm adding almost like half more of that. And then with the roughness, very, very little, which is basically like mirror-like. So this one is pretty much like mirror-like. And then index of refraction is at 1.500. So this one is basically, it's just adding more extra spec to it. It's not going to affect too much of the transparency at this point. And then for the shin, nothing, emission, nothing, thin, nothing. And then this is the good one. Under geometry, you can actually make not only the object transparent, like with transmission, because you can make the object transparent with the transmission, but if you look closely, I mean, like unless you create some map to eliminate the specular is going to be there still, right? But if you create the transparent geometry, then that means everything goes away. Basically, like it eliminates the specular, everything that's in the mesh is going to go away. So that's basically the one that's doing the trick of blending the surface perfectly between this area here, right? So it creates like a perfect blend because it's completely disappearing the geometry as well. So basically like what I'm using is another ramp, which looks like this, right? Another vertical ramp. It can be a duplicate of the other one, but I normally want to keep like a slightly different from that one so I can have different types of controls, but it's fairly in the same spot. It's just maybe a little bit more broad than the other one, right? But you're gonna have to do your own renders and play because it's gonna vary depending on the position of your UVs in space, right? The other thing we didn't talk about, so basically like the color map is here, right? So this one is plugged under the subsurface. So if you go to your subsurface right here, so that's the subsurface color. So I have the map plugged in there. So I have the curriculum texture, which looks like this. It's gonna look pretty crappy, right? That's the same one I brought from ZBrush. And then, but there's some tweaks in here. So for the color balance, I'm actually bring it down a little bit. So basically like bringing the exposure a little bit down. And the color gain, instead of like all the way to 1, I'm actually bring it down. So from 1, it's coming to 0.766 in my case here. This one though, it doesn't matter because the saturation is at 0, so it's not gonna change the color itself. So this is like, if it is 0, that's all you need to know. Saturation is 0, and then this one at 766, 0.766. And then I have some color offset happening as well. I'm actually offsetting slightly towards this brownish color in here with those amounts. So basically like if you copy those, you should get the same stuff. And again, this all depends of the type of result you want to get. If you want to get more pinkish, right, you want to shift more towards red. In my case here, I thought it was like, okay, it can be a little bit more peach color. And because of the way I painted my map, I had to shift a little bit towards this direction. And every time you use the color offset that's not black, that means you're going to be offsetting towards like a lighter color. So you can see like the general color here is slightly more gray. That means that I'm making the entire thing more desaturated, right? I'm desaturating the entire thing, so it's blending and becoming more of that peach color, more than the, you know, the super different colors between each other, right? You're not going to see variations super extreme like that, yellows and super reds and stuff. Everything's going to blend together, and then you're going to get something more like that render. Let's see if I can find it now. Where was it? Here. So you're going to see this type of result, right? It's just like trial and error, because I mean, like you have to see the render in real time to tweak those values and see what you're getting there, right? So if I play this one in real time here, if I switch this, you're going to see right there, look, it's going to get wider and wider, right? And then I'm going to go towards the black, and then on black, you're going to see the color I had before that was super saturated, right? So if I go more towards like grayish, right, you're going to get this type of result. So it's a matter of like really playing those values and see how you want to blend. Sometimes you're going to get like a carunculus that's much more red than the others, right? But in this case here, it's more pinkish. Let's see. Just, okay. So let's go back here. So this is basically what I'm doing. And then for the effects, I'm not doing anything different here, right? So basically like effects, nothing. And then that's basically what I'm shifting. And like I said, like this is just gonna change. You're gonna notice like you're gonna have to do like a, basically like a real-time render like that. Not real-time, I mean, this is all CPU here. But if you have a machine that handles it slightly well, I mean, you're gonna be able to actually see what you're doing in there, right? So basically like I go by feeling. And if I want more saturation, go more towards black, a little bit more desaturated, go to a more blend together, right? More towards gray, something like that. So that's basically the carunculus. And the only piece missing here is actually the way that I'm actually making it transparent, right? If you remember what I said, like in a couple of classes before, was actually this one here. If you go to the properties of the object, Control A, and if you go to your Arnold, the first thing you see here is this tab that this little checkbox that says opaque. By default, every object you bring to Maya, it's opaque by default. But if you want to get transparent shadows, you make sure that everything is off. So basically, turn off your opaque. So basically, Arnold can calculate transparent shadows. So make sure you have that turned off for both this piece, like the carunculus, and also this one. So that's off as well, right? But then if I go to the iris should be solid. So let's see if I click the iris. So let's see here, iris. So it's on. See, like it turned on in there. Then the corner is off. The pupil should be on. Actually, the pupil for some reason is off, but it could be as well be on. Doesn't matter. And then the carunculus is opaque, right? Tear line should be, actually, carunculus is off for the opaque, and tear line should be off as well. The tear line we're going to be tweaking in the next classes when you start adjusting the eyelids. But I'm going to show you the shader as well here today. So let's jump into this guy here, which is the eyeball. So for the eyeball, we're going to be looking at the same deal. First, the opaque is going to be off, right? And then under the modeling, UV editor, I'm going to look at this. And then this is going to be my UVs. Because I brought it from ZBrush and it's unsmooth, right? Like, so the board is going to be completely unsmooth. What I did here actually split between the middle, which is right here. So this is the front and this is the back. Because even if I rotate the eye pretty good, I'm not going to be seeing half of it, right? Unless you really are a freak and can actually show that entire thing. Or this is your intention with the model. But in my case here, I could actually save a lot of space by putting the back of the eyeball in that tiny little piece of UV in there. The only concern here is to make sure that's absolutely in the middle, because you want to use like a ramp map, a circular ramp, to actually control how transparent it is in the middle, right? So let's explore this shader here. Let's go back to the shader network. Let's expand it. So I have the eye cornea in here, right? And then let's look at the entire thing. Again, the shader networks are super tiny, right? Like they are not super complicated at all. It's just a few things plugged into them. Oh, and this one here, I forgot to mention that there is obviously the displacement map plugged, right? So for the curricula, I have the displacement map plugged. So if I go to this guy here, click on this, that's basically just a displacement, the way we already talked about how to assign, right? So I'm not gonna go into that. It's the same as for the face. So for the cornea, this one here, so that's basically what we have. Let's look at the shader. And then again, it's gonna be like a specular, no, base is gonna be 1 here, but doesn't matter because we are, again, if you look at the subsurface is at 1. So ignore the base, there's nothing to plug in here. I keep those things plugged, secondary maps, just as a backup if I wanna do some tests and reduce some of the subsurface, but I normally don't go back to it. So it's kind of like a waste in there, but. So for the specular, for the eyeball itself, which is the eyeball, and so it's like the cornea and the sclera all in a single one, right? That's the single object. So we're gonna have the specular at 0.750. We're gonna have the roughness at 0.020 again, and the instead of complete white is a little bit less than white. So you know, actually this one I'm cranking from 1 to 1.8. I'm surprised with that. For some reason I cranked it. And so this one should be more than white actually. It's an extra white. I think what I did that because I didn't want to use the index of refraction to crank the specularity, because this one is depending on the refraction itself. So I want to keep it the correct number. So I actually cranked the color, made like extra white in there. So the roughness is 0.20 and then 1.360. There's a little bit of an isotropy here effect, just to add a little extra direction change. But I mean, like direction is set to 0 here. I think don't remember exactly why I did it, but that's basically how I have it set up. It's working for me, but I can try to turn it off and see what's the difference. But for me, it works for now. So for the transparency, right? We talked about the UVs are completely circular here. Actually, it's just like a circle, right? And then it's inside of the UV using most of the space. So if I use a circular ramp, I should be able to control the transparency in there. So let's look at the rendering here, so we can have like a real-time interaction with it. Let's play around here so you can see exactly what the transparency, right? And actually, I'm in the wrong spot now. Let's bring it back to here. We can see this area. Let's grow a little bit like that. So here the transmission. I have this map plugged, which again, instead of like the regular Maya ramp, I'm actually using a AI ramp float. This one's from Arnold. And every time you see some AI in the front, it's gonna be a Arnold kind of shader, right? So if I go here to probably like utility, let's see, which one is that? AI ramp float. So you're gonna look for it, AI ramp float, this one here. And then we have the AI ramp RGB. So this one is just black and white with the float, like 32 bits, I believe. And then the RGB is gonna be the color, right? So I'm using the float one, and it's plugged in here. So plugged into the transmission, right? So if I go in here and I open this a curve, right? Like it's a circular type of ramp. And basically like my ramp is happening from here to here, and it's very linear, right? So what's gonna change here is gonna depend on how you have your model UV'd, right? But that's basically how you're gonna control. If I bring this one back here, it's eating part of the iris, as you can tell in there, right? So it's making the transparency very, very broad. If I bring more towards this, you're gonna see it's gonna become like almost no transparency. So like the blend is very, very tiny here. So it's I always like to have a little bit more of a blend like that, because you can get that kind of like a grayish kind of halo around the iris, which looks very natural, because it looks like something it's underneath it, and then there's a transparency happening. So it obviously it's going to blend into something a little bit grayish, because there's a shadow happening in there as well. And because everything is being calculated with transparent shadows, you should be getting actually transparent, you know, kind of shadow from this transparency here, right? So actually everything kind of blends together. So that's the way I'm blending it, just using the circular. If I bring this way, you can see more of that. If I bring all the way here, you're probably going to start seeing the disc underneath. Like that. So you can see the disc, right? That's ending right there. And then as I eat more of that, you're going to start hiding more and more of that disc more towards this area here, right? Until you find like a sweet spot. And that's going to be like trial and error, like I said, based on the on your own model. Yes.
I have a question about the iris size. You said it is 12 centimeters, right?
12 millimeters, yeah.
Yeah. And why is the disc so large if only this small portion is showing?
Yeah, it's because I want to make sure that the iris itself, where the transparency kind of ends in here, it's about 12 millimeters. But then I want to have a buffer, because I want to create this effect of transparency, right? And I kept it bigger than it should be, actually. I could have it shorter around here, but just to have, to make sure that I have like a decent blend, you know? Because, yeah, it's like what matters is that when you get to this area here, so this area that's visible to you, that should be around like 12 millimeters. But don't worry too much about the buffer that I have here. If you want to make it shorter, you can do it, you know, as long as you have this area. Let's see. Go ZBrush, come on, you can do it. So as long as you have this area here, Andy, right here, right? This have to be around the 12 millimeters. Everything else here is just a buffer. This is it's my comfort zone, you know. It's kind of like, okay, how much, how far I want to go with the blending, right? I can go maybe around here, just keep around here, or I can go further and keep a sharper area that you're still gonna read as the iris around here, but then have a little bit more of the effect of a halo. It's kind of like a semi-transparent and, you know, milky, if you will, effect, you know. But that's basically what you need is just this area here. That's the peaking here, which is going to define the size of your iris.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, no problem. So you see, like I'm controlling this whole thing here by just like pulling this on and off. So that's just a transparency map. Let's just cancel it for now. And then let's go to the other stuff here in the shader. So that's the transmission. And then I have the subsurface. I have a couple of things here are kind of like I plug those maps in here so I can have control and change the color of the iris on the fly, right? So there's a couple of things here. First, like let's just go to the basics. So it's completely subsurfacey, and then transparent right at the cornea, obviously because of that map we have plugged. But then we have the scale at 0.150, and then anisotropy I plugged like 1, so I have more front scatter slightly. And the random walk at version 2, right? So for the subsurface color, I have that crappy map that I plugged in here. I told you guys it's really bad. So it looks like, oh, not this one. I was talking about the iris. This is basically the map that came out with ZBrush, right? Using that exact same map that I painted in there. So that's the map that looks like from ZBrush. Again, like you have plenty of room to improve it, make it much nicer than this, but that's what I use, you know, and that's the time I spend on it. So for the others, or the parts of the shader in here, what I have plugged, so for the color offset, I don't have anything plugged, so it's just completely black, which is like, I want to use the exact same color that I'm seeing in terms of intensity, right? But then for the color gain, I have some tricks in here. So for the color gain in here, I have this ramp plugged. So let's see what it does. So if I render in there, and if I bring this one up, let's just memorize this, like 0 point, let's just copy that. If I bring this one towards this, you're gonna see the color changing, right? Which is basically like, you see like it's turning black around there. So what I'm doing is basically like, remember what I did in ZBrush, instead of like painting black right in the middle, I had it white right in the middle, right? But because I want to force that impression that the little halo around the iris is kind of like dark, right? So I'm actually bringing it all the way back here and just keeping a tiny little bit of it, a little slightly black. So imagine that this is becoming transparent, starting here, right? It's becoming transparent. But at the same time that's becoming transparent, I'm actually making slightly dark in there. So I have like a very low here at, let's say, 0.274, just to have a little bit of that halo, that instead of like going all the way to white and then becoming transparent at white, it's basically like becomes a little bit grayish around here and then transparent. So that's basically the little effect I'm adding. If you remove it completely, that's basically what you get. So you see like the blend in there is not as nice. It's just like, it's a little bit more straight. You can use like that if you want, but I like to have like a little bit more of that darkness in there, helping with the transparency, because there's a combination of things happening. You know, it's like there's the shadow that's being created there, because there's a little distance between the sclera itself and the iris, right? But I also want to fake a little bit of that darkness in there and have control for that. So I can have the option to go a little lighter if I want, depending on the type of eyeball, right? So I can do that kind of stuff. So that's the only change that I have in here, right, in the map. And then everything else should be default. So that's just plug in the color gain, that little ramp. All of this is recorded so you guys can go back and look at it. So going to the radius now, which is basically like the color that in the case of the face, we don't have anything plugged. It's just a plain color, right? But in this case here, I'm actually plugging again the same map, which is this one, right? Plugging the same map again. Probably that's a duplicate. I have just one single UV tile, so I don't need to turn it on here. And then for everything else here, let's say the exposure, apparently I'm cranking this exposure a little bit, and then nothing changed in here or there. So let's just see what if this is what this is doing. So if the exposure is higher, you're gonna get lighter eyeball like that, right? Lighter and lighter. And if I go lower here, I'm gonna get a little bit darker eyeball, right? So basically, like, I think I'm cranking very slightly because I thought it could be a little bit lighter. Sometimes what happens, like you need to have a certain level of contrast between the eyeball and the skin. Otherwise, it kind of like it doesn't sell as something realistic, you know? Of course, like if you're trying to make a character with like bloody eyes, right? Then you're gonna be playing with those values and make it a little darker, closer to the skin in terms of intensity, but just shifted red. But if you're going for something a little bit more like a clear eye, right? Then you're gonna be using something a little bit lighter. So I'm using just that little controlling there just to control the radius. But it's basically the same color of the color map that's basically being used for subsurface radius. And then for the coat, again, like there's nothing plugged in the coat. So this can be any value because that's not activated at all. And then for the geometry, there's no transparency or anything being plugged in there. And then I have my displacement map plugged as well. So basically like displacement map is plugged right here. Same way we plug the face stuff, right? So that's basically it. And that's it for the cornea itself and the eyeball. So now the iris itself, the iris is the tricky one. Just gonna hide this one. Actually, not gonna hide. Just gonna select the iris here and just gonna frame it here. Actually, this one, graph. And then let's look at this. So the iris is right. It has a little bit more nodes in here, as you can tell. So let's see what they are doing. So I have my base color in there plugged, probably just as a backup. No, actually, this one I think I'm using the base color instead of just the subsurface. And I have the texture map plugged in both subsurface color and radius. And then I have this iris color in here, but basically like, you know, it's like a duplicate of the same color map. It's just plugged into different things so I can have individual controls, right? Those ones, this one controls both controls here, and this one controls just the base color. So let's look at let's look at the mesh itself. So for the specular, no, let's go back right here to actually subsurface. You see, it's all the way to 1. So that means, again, I have stuff plugged in my base that's completely, you know, you don't need to have anything. It's just like a backup. If I want to go less subsurfacey and play with those values, I guess. So, but in this case here, I'm not even using it. So it's just all the way to 1 for subsurface. So let's go back in here to specular. So the specular, because brownish eye, I'm actually using slightly kind of like a skin tone kind of specular. So I'm colorizing the specular a little bit just to fake a little bit of the caustic effect. And I'm actually using the roughness slightly higher. It's because I have some bump assigned as well. So that's going to become very diffuse. If you don't have any bump, you could use like something like 0.600 or 700 here. And then the index of refraction is at 1.55, which is basically at this point, it just controls the amount of specularity, right? So that's basically what I have plugged for the spec. For the subsurface, I have random walk 2 as again. The scale is very tiny because I want to make sure that subsurface is not too broad, so it doesn't get too glowy, right? I want the subsurface just to hit those little tiny forms in there. And to do that, I need a very, very tiny scale, just to get like those tiny little folds to become subsurfacey, but then everything else is kind of a little bit more solid. So for the subsurface color, I have this map plugged, which is that crappy one I show you guys from ZBrush with some cavity and some slight variations between like oranges and a little bit greenish in there, but really basic, really. And then I think I painted a little bit darker around it just to create that impression that, you know, it's like if you want to fade things, at least it always reads a little bit towards the dark instead of like something that's going to read lighter underneath that transparency, right? So it's a little darker in there, it goes a little darker. So I'm using the exposure, I'm actually cranking the exposure not slightly, it's quite a bit, from 0 to 0.867. So that means that map is becoming lighter and lighter. So I used to control, for example, if I want a darker eye, right, I can actually bring this down. If I want a little bit lighter eye, I can actually bring it up. So let's see what it does here. If I play it, let's get back to see what my model looks like in the viewport like that. So let's bring this one around here so I can see this is the color of the iris. So it looks like this right now. So if I play with exposure in here, see it goes darker and darker. So this is basically like me controlling how, you know, light I want the iris to go by cranking the color of the map, right? And then there's nothing different in here, but then I have maps plugged on both gain and offset. So let's see what each one of them is doing. So under color gain, I have this map colored plugged, which is like it's again a AI ramp, but it's the RGB one of the ones I show you. I was using the float for transparency, and then I have the ramp RGB for color itself, right? If I expand this map here, those are the colors I'm using. So you see, like in this area here, that's slightly more on the green side. I'm actually using a color like that, probably this one here. Actually, this one here, the darkest one, is just for that little area in here, right? And then this one is a little bit more of the green one. And you see how subtle they have to be, otherwise they go super saturated. So if I change anything here, if I change this color here to something more saturated like that, that's the middle area there. You saw it already got much more red, right? If I change this one here more towards green, that became much more saturated green. So that's why you have to be like very careful with how saturated you want to go. Because if I do this, it becomes completely artificial. You can make like a Hulk eye, right? And same here, right? So that's, you know, it's like the darker area. So right there, that halo. Again, see, like this halo is basically being created by different layers. It's like in the color of the iris, in the color of the sclera, and in the transparency as well. So everything helps to define how you want that to blend. And then if you go very light, obviously, then you're gonna kill that effect altogether, right? You're gonna create that little halo in there. So that's basically the way that I'm controlling the color of the iris, is by using this ramp. So it's much easier for me, for example, if I have a model that has a blue eye, for example, like the blue eyes, like this one I have now, the Ray Harryhausen. So that's basically the way I'm controlling and colorizing it. Instead of like painting a brand new map every time, I just use the colors in here. So let's go back in here. Let's look at the other ones. So that one is plugged in the color gain. And then I have a color offset as well with a different type of ramp as well, ramp RGB here. So I can actually paint it with whatever color I want. And then it looks like this. It's almost completely black, right? So if I go to this one and I change it, so like as I go higher, it's gonna start becoming more like whitish and whitish in there. Kind of like a quick way to change like the entire color. Like that, right? So towards blue or something like that. And then obviously, like if you wanna go towards blue, try to just desaturate the color, right? Everything has to be very desaturated. So it's almost like a gray version of that. So if I go like this, and then I can go a little lower now. This has to be actually in combination with the other color maps that I just showed you, the other color ramp. Otherwise, it's not gonna add the effect that you want. But that's basically like what this ramp is doing. I have the option to actually make things lighter or darker and colorize slightly as well. So this one here, the outside one, it's coloring the outside of the, towards the edge here where the transparency is, right? Because after that, obviously, it's gonna, it's not transparent anymore, so it's not gonna affect the iris because we're just playing with the iris right now. So this one is completely black because I'm using the original color in there. So basically, that's what it is for the iris in here when it comes to the, let's see, what do we have? This one was just a subsurface color, right? Now for the radius, I think it's a combination. I think it's the same thing. I think both of them are using the same stuff. Yeah, 873 color gain, color offset. So basically it's the same stuff plugged twice. So let's look at the shader network, the way it looks in here. I think that's the one I was using. Yeah, exactly. So subsurface colors and subsurface radius is being controlled by the exact same maps. And with those same maps plugged in there with the RGB, the two different ones, right? And then they go and they connect to the subsurface color and then subsurface radius the same way. So you basically, like if you control one, you control both. So those are basically the same. Scale, like I said before, very tiny, random walk 2, and then the coat, 0.150, and then slightly towards orange, peach, orangey. So those are the values I have in there for HSV. So if you want to copy those, 18.462, 0.737, and then 1. And then for the roughness, it's very rough, so it's like super broad spec. And the index of refraction is 1.5, right? So this is basically like the index of refraction. If you don't have any transparency, that's just gonna pump up the amount of specularity, right? So it's like, that's basically what I have. Then for the bump map, I have some bump map assigned in here, which is this one here, just a noise that's coming from ZBrush, I believe. So it's not ZBrush, from Maya itself. So it's a noise node that comes from Maya, and it's actually the Perlin nose, nose. So under Maya here, if you go to your texture, let's see, 2D textures, you have the noise here, right? So this is the node I'm using. And then you're gonna see there is this below here, and you have the Perlin noise, sorry. And then that's basically what I'm using. But then obviously with those values in here, again, if you wanna copy, let's see, I'm selecting the right thing. Let's make sure I'm selecting the right thing. This one, and then let's go under here and noise. So that's basically the values I'm using right there. So 0 to 1, so you can actually copy that screen once you have in the video. And, just to add an extra layer of noise in the just to create that kind of spongy kind of effect, you can actually play with those values. And my bump depth is actually 0.3. And then with that bump value, that's basically that Perlin noise plugged into it. And then let's see what else, if I forgot anything. Let's see. So I have the transparency here. Oh yeah, the caustics. So I didn't mention the caustics. So for example, for this object in here, we need some caustic effects to create this kind of like the little light streaks and everything underneath, right? Like reflected in the, or projected into the iris. So if you go to your advanced in here, so you click that one, and under your shader, right? Go all the way to the tab where it says advanced. You're gonna see there's a caustics checkbox. So if you check that one, you should be able to get the caustics projected. Obviously, the caustics is gonna be dependent on the amount of samples you have. So if you're not getting a nice result, sometimes you have to crank those values, you know? So especially the camera here, like that's the main one that's gonna multiply everything. Sometimes you have to get like a higher value to get the perfectly defined caustics. Let's see if this one has caustics. So this one here doesn't have caustics. It has internal reflections for whatever reason. I don't know if it made a difference, but that's the way I have it set, and it has no caustics. I think it's because it becomes like non-transparent starting here. And my intention to make it transparent here is more like in the way of blending with the eyeball itself than creating any caustic effects underneath, you know? So basically like it becomes more like a single object once I have that blending geometry assigned to it. So at the end you have, let's see, something like that, right? And then the last piece that we forgot to mention was the tear line, right? Oh, this is basically like almost like from the front, right? But because of the 1.6 refraction that we added in there, as you turn it around, obviously, oh, come on, Maya, you can do it. Obviously, you're gonna see more of this distortion, right? That you should look fairly realistic as you turn more towards the sides, right? Now, the last piece that we forgot to mention here was the tear line. And the tear line here is it's very, very simple geometry. You see, like I keep like very, very low in terms of the amount of spans that I use. And then if I need to use more to conform to the surface later, I can add more. But just to start, I start very simply. And the way that's built is just like this. It's like a 90 degrees angle, because I want to create like this impression that's a perfect blend, you know, it's a perfect curvature that happens. So what I do, this one is not conformed to the eyeball here, but once it is, once the eyelid is in place and the eyelid is working correctly, what I do, I snap those vertices here to the eyelid, make sure that they snapped correctly. And then I go back here and I snap the top ones and the bottom ones to the base. Like the top one's gonna snap to the eyeball, right? You can use like you can either make it live here. For example, if you click the eyeball, you click this little magnet in here, right? So if you switch to, let's see if I can find this one, and I just click in any vertex in here. Now if I move, it's gonna snap to the surface, right? So for example, like I snap those guys once I'm happy with the surface, which is not the case just yet. And I snap those guys in there, facing the normal, right? Just make sure everything's correct. And then once I'm happy with that, then I'm gonna go, and if I'm seeing the skin in here, I'm gonna try to make sure that this one is snapped right in the intersection between the skin and the eye. So that would have to go closer to the eye and there to produce the correct effect, right? But in this case here, I'm just gonna be tweaking it manually here because I'm not gonna be snapping anything perfectly at this point. So I'm just gonna bring this one a little bit closer in here so you get a little bit of more the correct reflection. And then let me show you what I have as shader and texture for this one, which is very, very simple. It creates a nice little effect. If I bring like any render here, let's see. Man, the allergies are eating me up. So that's why I'm itching my nose like crazy. I swear it's not cocaine. But oh man, allergies kill me. I have like, since I was a kid with like itchy nose, itchy nose. I'm talking fast here, right? People are like, oh my God, yes, he snores something. Yeah. Fortunately or unfortunately, I never used any drugs in my life other than alcohol. But let's see. Let's try those guys here. So you see like this little tiny little glimpse of light in there. That's basically what the type of effect we want. We don't want anything that's completely plain, so it's a mirror reflection. We just want like little dots of reflection like that, you know. And to create that, we're gonna add some noise to it. So basically, like my shader looks like this. Let's look at the model itself. So it looks just like that. This is basically BS. You don't need to use that little thing. It's because my initial idea was to actually create that little thing, which is like right there, to actually blend this area with this one here. But because I'm blending everything with the map and the specular is already in the eyeball and everything, this is BS. You don't need this. Now, if you want to do something really cool, you can actually continue with this and cover the top part as well, because that happens in real life as well. You have this tiered lining here, but it's wet all the way around. So obviously, if it's in contact with the eyelid at the top, you're gonna have a similar type of ramp happening all the way across. So you can do that at the top. In this case here, I only have it at the bottom. But that's basically what I have for the UVs. So make sure that's completely unwrapped. So it has to be, it doesn't need to be like in any specific direction, but completely unwrapped would be good. And then for the shaders, let's explore the shaders here. So the tier lines. So specular base is going to be independent, right? There's nothing there because since I went completely transparent with the transmission here, set 1. So you see like the weight here for the base is going to become 0. It's going to be grayed out when I crank this one all the way to 1. So everything's grayed out. So that means the base is useless here. Specular is 0.760. So you see like I'm not cranking all the way. And then this one is not even at 1. It's at 0.972. I always find that, you know, you can play with 2 different levels of specular instead of trying to crank one single level too much. For example, like instead of like going to 1 here, sometimes I rather use specular here and then use a coat in combination. So you can get like a double effect for the spec. And then for the roughness is 0.40. So not totally mirror looking. It's a little bit more like a broad spec, but not by much. It's almost mirror. And the index of refraction, for some reason, maybe it's the way that I was perceiving it in the renders. Instead of like 1/360, I actually cranked to 1.6. Or maybe it's because I don't have a double side, so it's just like one little flat surface. Maybe that's why I cranked it. Whatever reason, it's a lot to do with how I perceive things when I render like this, right? I go by feeling. If it feels okay, I actually, you know, keep moving. If it doesn't look okay, I keep tweaking some values to get the right value that I want. But again, I'm sharing this out of my good heart with you guys. If you want to try, if it's not working for your model for whatever reason, then you're totally free to play with those values. But those renders I'm doing for you guys here are using exactly those values, so you can go by them or, you know, try different things. And then for the transmission, there is nothing assigned here as a map, so it's completely transparent, but with no maps assigned. One thing you can try, actually, if you want to go very, very anal about it, is, for example, like if you can straighten this model completely in your UV space. So you have like a flat, like a, you know, it's like a stripe, right? And then you could potentially use like a ramp map that starts like for your geometry, completely transparent right here at the very top, completely transparent at the very bottom. And then you just have the reflection right in the middle and everything blends perfectly with the skin and with the eye, right? You could do that as well if you want to try. That would have to be plugged into your geometry opacity, right? Just like we did with the carancula. That would be like a very fancy thing to do that can add a lot, you know, or not much. Probably it's not going to add much to what you see visually. So coat, I don't have anything. See, like I mentioned that I use double sometimes, but in this case here, I don't even have the coat assigned. So it's weight is 0. No shin, no emission because it's not self-illuminated. No thin film. And then for the bump mapping, I'm using a noise, which is like a regular Maya noise, again with the Perlin noise, right? And those are the values I'm using here. So if I play with them, let's do a little render here in real time. Let's hide everything. Let's hide this and this so you can see exactly how it looks like. Oh, and this disc here in the middle, which is basically like the cover for the pupil, is just a black, flat surface. You know, there's nothing special about it. Not subsurface or anything. It's just like a base that's basically black like that. like way black. So basically like it goes completely dark in there. So don't worry about that one. So this one here, let's try to do a render just with it in the scene. And let's see, it's gonna look very weird because it's gonna try to refract the background, right? And it's gonna look that kind of mirror, almost like metallic. So it looks like this. Let's move more towards the center right here. So that's basically what that is. So it's kind of like a glassy kind of thing, right? And then let's play with the noise. So I show you my values for the noise, but you can see how they change in here. And again, it's gonna be optional how you want it. This one has caustics and internal reflections. Let's turn off internal reflections. Then it doesn't do much because it's just a flat surface, right? It doesn't have a back. So that's kind of BS. You can actually turn it off. So caustics effect is gonna add a nice little lighting inside of it, right? So I keep it on. And then for the noise itself, it looks like this. So I have 0, 1, that's the values you can copy. And then the frequency is what's gonna be changing everything. So if I go lower here, you're gonna see, let's just save this screenshot. View store snapshot. And then let's just change this frequency here to lower. You can see it became like mirror, right? It's almost like it's following that little structure, right? Like the form itself without breaking it up. If I go higher and higher here, you're gonna see how much it starts breaking. It becomes much more irregular, right? So it gets super bumpy like that, which is not what you want, right? You don't want something super bumpy. You want like bumpy enough just to break up the specular so it doesn't read like a single line, right? Like something like this, that's a mirror, right? But you don't want something like this either. So you want to go for something that it looks correct for what you want. And again, the only way to know is when you have all the objects in the scene and you're doing those quick renders like that. You can actually, if you want to do fast, you just like select a small area like that and just make sure that everything is on and you can play with those values, So let's see if I forgot anything about this shader. I think I cover it pretty good. So yeah, caustics, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, nothing else. That's about it. So let's go back here. Let's just show everything again. And then you guys, let me know if you have any questions. Again, like when it comes to the eyelid itself and the way it connects with everything, the way we're gonna be blending those things and making sure that everything is tight, it's gonna come in the next, probably like after tomorrow. But yeah. Let's see, back here. Something like that. That's basically the tier line. Let's see if we can get a shot right there. Yeah, when you have the object in place, then it starts to read much nicer than when you don't have it. Yeah, let's resolve it in there. So you see like this area here, you can see the edge because we don't have the eyelid yet. But once it's in place, like I said before, if you want to go super anal about it, you can actually just make sure that the UVs are completely flat and straight. And then you can add like a little ramp just to blend this area here, Then you can get like a perfect a cross between like going from wet to going into the specular in the eyelid. So basically like the transparency is going to help to blend like what's actually wet and what's part of the skin, right? And also in the skin, obviously, you can actually play with that and add more specular in that area. Like I have in my model, like I showed you the other day to you guys, like my specular map is painted completely white in this area here, like in the eyelid, because I want to make sure it reads like super specky in there. So when you have this layer on top, it's kind of like a second layer of speck that's happening there. It ends up like working very nicely when you have everything put together, Yes, tomorrow when we start painting the colors, I'm gonna be talking about like how I approach those things, it's like why I make certain things a little bit whiter than others and yellower than others and greenish than others, how to paint like this little micro veins that's gonna be very similar to what I showed today with the eyeballs, right? And then go over this entire thing. probably like in one single day, we cannot paint the entire thing, but you can get some of the basic color in place, and I can show you like how to add the fine detail. And then obviously it's going to be more repetition of the same, but I have a bunch of brushes I use to create like the effect of like variations for the skin, you know. It's mostly, like I said before, it's like a bunch of different spray brushes, just with different distances between them, different sizes for the little dots, and in different intensities, you know. It's just like adding layers and layers of that, and then you start creating something that looks more realistic, you know. But yeah, I'm gonna get to that tomorrow. We are like at 11:29 right now. It's kind of like right on time. But if you guys have any extra question, I can answer now, and then we go on our way. And I'm gonna actually post that video today for the sculpting of the iris, and then you can have fun with that as well. Just make sure that you collect like a good reference for what you want to go for, and then if you want to go for the lighter eyes, I'm pretty sure you're gonna have more fun with sculpting the micro detail in there. But oh, actually, I'm sorry. Sorry, you can talk.
Chris?
Yeah.
Does this curvature in the iris region is so exaggerated in the average person? It seems to me I never really observed how exaggerated it is.
Mm-hmm.
Is this a common rule that it is that it has such a big curvature in that region?
A big curvature. What do you mean, like the how you call the cornea? The cornea.
Yes, this big curvature in
the bulge.
In the bump.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
It has a big bulge, actually. You know, it's like you can see like in this type of example here. I mean, like the eyes are not like completely spherical, right? They have a little bit more of it's an organic form, so it's not like a perfect sphere, but they definitely bulge in this area here. It's like filled with liquid in there. It's kind of like, it has to be a lens, right? So the lens has to be more bulgy like that. You see like in representations like this, for example, right? Because it's a fair amount of bulge, you know, that comes out. This one is actually, it's almost like they drew like a perfect circle, but then they are breaking up, just like I'm doing with my model. Yeah.
One nice way to check this bulge is to check people sleeping.
Mm-hmm.
Videos of sleeping.
Oh yeah.
They move the eyes, and you can see the volume.
Yeah, the REM stages, right? They get super crazy and fast, and you can see everything. Yeah.
It's so weird.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Thank you.
All right, guys.
Chris,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
One last question. I don't know if it's a note question, but what material were you using in ZBrush while you were sculpting in the normal subdivision layers and in the HD geometry?
Oh, it's the same one for both. What I do is actually, people ask about my material. It's the super crappy. If you get the basic material from ZBrush, right? You get that basic material. Uh-huh. And then if you go to the material here, you can modify certain things. So I normally just crank the diffuse a little more. So I go to 100, and then I go to the specular, and I crank the specular some more, and then I play with the specular curvature. So if you do those three things, you get like pretty much the same shader that I use for everything. I don't trust. I don't trust those matcap materials because they kind of like hide a lot of stuff. I kind of trust the old school materials from ZBrush. I just tweak to get more specky because I want to get something that looks a little bit more blend. But that's basically what I do, you know. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
And then, of course, like in this new ZBrush, like for a couple of versions now, I can actually save the material, right? Like save, how it says, like there's something here. Is it the material? Let's say material, save as a startup material, right? So if you click that one, next time you open ZBrush, it's going to be your default material. So that's what I did normally. Yep. So guys, thank you so much again. I think today was pretty packed with a lot of stuff to go over. And then tomorrow is going to be pretty packed as well. And things going to start speeding up, you know. And then it's going to slow down a little bit at the very end again. So I'm going to be relaxing and showing you some bonus stuff. Like I'm going to go over the, you know, my clay materials and brushes and things like that, how I built them, show you some examples and stuff as a bonus at the very end. But from now on, all the way to at least like half of next week, we're going to be pretty much like hardcore. Like I'm going to be throwing a lot of information to you guys. And this is the kind of class that, like I said, you don't have assignments, but you have so much stuff packed together that it's going to take like some time to digest. So, you know, it's like in my previous group was basically like they're rewatching stuff still, you know, it's like still rewatching those videos and following the tutorials and everything. And they're starting to see more and more results now, because like it's hard to keep up because I'm kind of like always like one step ahead of you guys. For example, I already have eyes in my model from the weekend render, right? But just today I'm showing eyes to you guys. So obviously you're gonna have to catch up. You're gonna have to build this, you know, sculpt the eyes and stuff like that. But don't feel like you're falling behind because you're not. It's just like because I'm doing my thing in my own rhythm and try to expose you guys to all the information, break down every single thing I do. But you guys are gonna have to take more time to digest it. That's all it is. It's just a lot of hours that go into these things, you know. So thank you so much, guys. I see you tomorrow.
Thank you, Chris. Have a good night, everyone.
Awesome. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.